Hey there, and thank you for joining us on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight, following the fatal police shooting of Dexter Reed, we take a look at CPD's rules for use of force. Plus, examining the officer's actions leading up to Reed's death.
And I just want to see justice for my son. I want to see the officers held accountable.
And community members call for changes following the deadly traffic stop. First off tonight, the rules that govern when Chicago police officers can use deadly force are facing new scrutiny. That's after police body cam footage released yesterday showed 4 officers firing 96 shots during a traffic stop that killed 26-year-old Dexter Reed. Reporter Heather Sharon joins us now to break it all down. Heather, so we know that there are 2 probes into the shooting death of Dexter Reed. Let's take them one by one, starting with the investigation by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. What will that probe focus on?
So that probe will determine whether officers followed, and this is a mouthful, CPD's de-escalation, response to resistance, and use of force policy. That policy makes it officers' highest goal is to preserve the sanctity of life. But of course, they're allowed to use justifiable force. Where the line between justifiable force and excessive force is really what these investigations are going to determine.
And what exactly do CPD rules say about when officers can use deadly force?
Well, this policy, last rewritten just about a year ago, requires officers to use de-escalation techniques to avoid physical confrontations. And they can only respond to imminent threats with escalating uses of force based on objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional decisions based on the totality of the circumstances. You're looking at a graphic now that shows you just how complicated these decisions and the rules governing officers in what is often sort of a very fraught, high pressure, high stress situation. That's why these probes are going to sort of dig into the very minutia of what happened on March 21st.
Yes, I'm sure police officers would say there's a lot of calculation that has to go on in their minds in a situation like that. Heather, will it matter that the initial investigation shows that Reed shot first? And will it matter that officers unloaded 96 shots in about 40 seconds?
Yes, they will both matter because they will have to decide whether officers responded reasonably and whether they faced an imminent threat.
Now that leads us, of course, to the second probe that is also underway by Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox. What will her office focus on?
Her office is going to decide whether, if the shooting was not justifiable, whether those officers committed criminal acts and whether they should be charged and face a jury. She will have to decide whether there is beyond a reasonable doubt evidence. Now, COPA only has to decide whether it's more likely than not officers violated that city policy, a much lower standard.
How long will we have to wait for any answers, Heather?
It's going to be months. These are very complicated, fraught questions. There is a lot of evidence that investigators have to sift through. And then, of course, they're going to have to make some very tough decisions.
Okay, Heather Sharon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And we're back with more right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
As we just heard, the release of graphic video showing the fatal shooting of Dexter Reed has raised questions over the use of deadly force by Chicago police officers. The footage of officers firing 96 shots at Reed, including after he exited the car apparently unarmed, has caused outrage and demands for change and, of course, accountability. Joining us now with more are Reverend Jeanette Wilson, Senior Advisor to Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Reverend Frederick Haynes III at the Rainbow Push Coalition. Frank Chapman, Educational Director and Field Organizer at the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And joining us via Zoom, Arewa Karen Winters, founder of the 411 Movement for Pierre Lowry and a member of the 15th Police District Council, and Reverend John Abercrombie, senior pastor at Zoe Life Ministries International and pastor to the family of Dexter Reed. Thanks to the four of you for joining us. Reverend Abercrombie, I want to start with you, please. What were your initial reactions upon viewing the video that was shared with the family on Monday, released to the public yesterday?
Well, actually, I was somewhat shocked when we, with the family at COPA, when we watched the video, because it was just horrific to see what took place after seeing the how the police approached him, and the whole event itself was just very, very traumatic, and it was really traumatic for the family, for the mother and the father as well. Once we begin to see the shots and how everything transpired, we were able to see all of the angles as it pertains to the shooting. And what has happened up until this point is that everything has been shown, and the narrative that has been given, or the narrative that is being seen by the public, is not the actual narrative that should be really seen, to see the actual shooting when he got outside of the vehicle. And at that point, that's where all of the action really began to took place. And again, Reverend, as you stated.
Well, Reverend, I just wanted to mention, as you were speaking, we were showing some of the doorbell camera footage. We're careful about repeatedly showing the instance where Dexter Reed was shot outside the car. But you mentioned the narrative, that we're not getting the full narrative. What more do you think needs to be said or seen?
Well, I think we need to be able to be seen where you can take where one of the officers who actually shot well over 48 times. He had a 9mm pistol that he reloaded 3 times, and on his video, on one of the cameras, you're able to see that. Also, no one ever, the footage that's being shown by the media is where the shooting takes place, when the female officer comes to the car, she approaches the car, tell them to lower the window, and the next thing, when he raised the window, you start hearing a barrage of gunshots. From another angle, you'll see that where even the first shot that was alleged that Dexter released himself, you can see that footage, as well as right after that, they begin to shoot. And Dexter, for say maybe the first 40 shots, I think there was, or 50, there was a pause, and then Dexter, he gets out of the vehicle. At that point.
Sorry, Reverend. I think we may have lost one guest, but we're working on getting her back. But while that's happening, I want to get to Reverend Wilson here in studio, because we know there are lots of questions that are being asked about the reason for the stop in the first place. Based upon what we know as of now, what are some of your biggest questions about that?
Well, most people have asked me, why did he get stopped? These were not uniformed police officers. They were in an unmarked car. They were in plain clothes. So you would not know that they were police officers in the first place. It is rare that a TAC team would do a traffic stop about a seatbelt that they couldn't see. Why did they go through such an activity? They moved the car in front to block his forward movement. What was that all about? That couldn't have been about a seatbelt in the car. And so we want to know, why was the TAC team there? Why did they decide to target him? And then how much force do you need to stop one man? How many gunshots need to be fired? If he has, and the question is, who fired first? We don't know. We're not clear. And so we have a lot of questions about that. And the use of excessive force, which is clear from the number of shots, what gave rise to that? And we've seen this all too often.
And as you mentioned, these officers were in plain clothes. I want to clarify, I think yesterday, in an unmarked car. Yesterday, I think we referred to them as undercover at one point, but they were plainclothes officers, not undercover. Frank Chapman, Civilian Office of Police Accountability is investigating the shooting, and we had the chief administrator of that agency on this program last night, saying that she had doubts about the veracity of the officers' accounts, but she also says that it appears Reed fired first, and of course someone in that position would not say that if, of course, they were not confident and certain that that was the case. But what do you make of what we've heard from COPA so far?
Well, what I make of it is there must be another video, because the video that I saw, that's not clear. No, let me go further than that. The video that I saw,
I didn't see Reed making a shot.
You didn't see him fire. Is it possible
No,
that,
I
that it
didn't.
happened?
And somebody else saw that, then I want to see that video, because that's not on the video that I saw. That neither was it on the video that CNN News saw, because they said they used the word unclear. CNN News, cable network news, said that it was unclear as to whether or not he shot. Well, what was clear to me was I didn't see it on that video. What I did see was police officers shooting, you know, and I saw him unarmed. That's what I saw.
Well, police also say that a weapon was found in the car, because obviously from these videos, none of us can see inside the car.
I understand that, but I want you to understand where I'm coming from. A large number of us in the community don't trust what the police say about these things, because they've been dishonest in the past. They've covered up their crimes, you know, and if you don't have, if the only report you got is a report from the police, then that's all you got, because the dead person cannot tell you anything.
Well, that's why we have to have a different kind of investigation. If, in fact, there was a gun in the car, did it have, well, had it been fired? There had to be some gun residue around. And I mean, there are a lot of questions that we can't tell from the video, and we're certainly not listening to the officers. Why were there 4 officers there in the first place for a traffic stop?
And you mentioned, you know, gunshot residue. Obviously, they'll be able to tell whether or not that gun was fired in the course of the investigation. So a lot to learn. Arewa Karen Winters, I want to get you in here because you, as we know, you're a newly elected 15th Police District Council member. Are you know, hopeful that the city's commission on the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, as well as you and your colleagues on the police district councils, will be able to hold CPD accountable and prevent future instances like this?
Well, so let me be clear about something. In this juncture, I'm not necessarily representing as a district councilwoman. I don't want to conflict anything, right? Or deal with any politics. I'm operating as the 411 Movement for Pierre Lorry founder, because my great nephew was shot and killed in the 11th district on April 11, 2016. Tomorrow will be 8 years for my family. And also, I'm a leading organizer with the Chicago Consent Decree Coalition. So I served as the co-chair for the Use of Force Working Group. So we helped to kind of revise, or we made some additions to their policy and some slight changes. But one thing that the policy says, and I didn't see happen, and I'm not an expert on anything, I'm a lay person, right? I'm a community member. Police officers, before they use that, this is in the policy, police officers are supposed to identify themselves before they execute lethal force. I didn't hear that, and I can't really watch the video for, you know, just for being re-traumatized. De-escalation is where it starts. When a video starts, I didn't hear any de-escalation techniques. Everything I heard was escalated. So they created a critical situation for that young man. They put that young man in an extremely volatile, probably reactionary situation. So I don't want to start with what he did. I want us to continue to start with what they did. We always put an emphasis on the victim, and that's where the narrative always begins in the city of Chicago with our policing department. I want to start with what they did to that young man, how they approached that young man, how they talked. They had guns drawn. This young man is sitting in his car with 5 officers. It wasn't them 4, but 5 officers around his car, all these guns drawn at him. And I didn't hear them say anything about, oh, we just pulled you over because you weren't wearing your seatbelt. And at the time he exited the car with no weapon in hand, firing was supposed to cease and desist. And I'm not saying that from the policy. I'm saying from a human perspective. That was an opportunity for them to apprehend that young man and not murder him, not execute him. And I want to say this real quickly. The 11th district is notorious. My nephew was killed in the 11th district. On Monday, the family of Reginald Clay will be back at the 11th district at 5:30 for the same reason. Last year, they shot and killed their loved one. It was the young man shot and killed shortly after my nephew during a foot pursuit chase. No gun, shot to the back of the head, running. I tried to find that young man's name and couldn't because I wanted to lift his family up because us families need to pull together around this. But okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, and condolences. You mentioned the 8th anniversary for you and your family for Pierre Lurie tomorrow. Before I let you go, very briefly, Reverend Abercrombie, what would the family like to see next in this case?
Well, basically what the family is really after is, first of all, is justice, accountability, transparency from the authorities that are involved. And, you know, that's what they're looking for, and support from their community. You know, the mother at this point really needs counseling. She's traumatized.
It is
you know,
certainly a traumatic situation for everyone, a video that is difficult to watch, and it is understanding for those of you who choose not to watch it. We'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Reverend Jeanette Wilson, Frank Chapman, Reverend John Abercrombie, and Arewa Karen Winters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, a closer look at the officers' actions leading up to Dexter Reed's killing. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight's coverage of public safety is supported by the Su Ling Jin Charitable Foundation Initiative for Reducing Violence in Chicago.
Investigations from the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA, and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office are being conducted to determine whether the police officers violated conduct policies in the fatal shooting of Dexter Reed. Joining us now with more are Arthur Larugio, a professor of criminal justice and psychology at Loyola University Chicago, and Sharon Fairley, a University of Chicago law professor who previously served as the chief administrator of the Independent Police Review Authority, the agency responsible for police misconduct investigations. From that position, she also helped create and build Chicago's Civilian Office of Police Accountability. We should also note that we invited the Chicago Police Department and the Fraternal Order of Police, but they have yet to respond. Art and Sharon, I thank you both for joining us. I want to start with your initial reactions, and then of course we'll get into some more specific questions. But Art, first question to you: what's your initial reaction of what we saw yesterday?
Well, I heard a lot of very important observations by your guests. They were raising the same kinds of questions that I would raise. I'd want to know why a tactical unit was engaged in any patrol activities related to traffic or vehicular violations. I'd want to know what it was other than the purported seatbelt violation that put them in a state of hyper vigilance and aggressiveness. I did not see in the video any attempts to de-escalate the situation, to set the stage for the stop, to inform the young man why he was being stopped, and to back away from the vehicle to perhaps reduce the tension he might have been feeling inside of it. And he was surrounded by police who drew their guns, one displaying his gun on the windshield of the vehicle.
I want to get into some of those more specifics as well, but briefly, Sharon Fairley, I wanted to get your reaction, your initial reaction as well.
Sure. Well, of course, the video is just incredibly tragic and heart-wrenching because there's a loss of life, and it's really hard to watch and under any circumstances. But again, the incident, there's just a lot going on, and as there are a lot of questions that are being raised, and of course, that's what these investigations are going to try to uncover, is whether or not there were violations of policy and law with regard to the way the officers conducted themselves. And of course, just looking at the video itself is not going to give all those answers. It's going to take the full investigation. So it's really important not to rush to judgment here, but to let the investigations play themselves out. But there are still, nonetheless, a lot of questions to be asked.
As we know, and as we've mentioned several times, 4 police officers firing 96 rounds in approximately 40 seconds. Can you tell, can you say whether or not that is excessive at this point in the investigation, Arthur?
you have to think about the police officer's state of mind. They obviously felt that Mr. Reed was posing a threat. If he indeed fired first and injured a police officer, then there's just cause for returning fire under those circumstances. That's lawful use of force. Now, how do we quantify what's excessive? The kinds of weapons that officers have requires but a couple of pulls of the trigger to release numerous rounds. These are not revolver type weapons. And so the police, being at a heightened degree of sensitivity and threat, are not going to be making a kind of thoughtful decisions about how long they should hold the trigger down to release the rounds. That's not the part of their brain that's operating at those moments. It's the part of the brain that's responding to threat. And so they're not making considered decisions along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, many people there's been a lot of talk about the basis for this stop in the first place. According to police, it was purportedly for not wearing a seatbelt in a car with some very tinted windows. Does this initial response from police as they approached Reed, what do you make of that?
So it's not, it's actually consistent with the Constitution. There's a case that says that it's okay for police to stop someone for a traffic violation, even when they're really interested because they think something more serious is going on with that person. That in and of itself is actually legal. Now, whether or not we want police to be making those kinds of pretextual stops, is what they're called, is another question. And so I think, to me, the question is, what was it that generated their interest in this particular car, person, or vehicle that made them stop? And then, the other question that I'm asking is, when Mr. Reed, declined to, start, when he was rolling his window up and was disobeying their order about the window, was it the correct response according to policy and training to actually threaten him with deadly force by pointing a weapon? Or did that escalate the situation unnecessarily? Because one of the things that the CPD policy says is that when considering the totality of the circumstances for an incident like this, they will consider what led to the encounter, what the conduct of the officers were that led to the need to use force. And so that will be considered, and that will be part of the investigation.
Well, and to that point, you mentioned, Sharon, Reed can be heard on the video saying, "I'm trying," when officers are shouting at him to open the door, because initially he rolled the window down and then back up, and he says, "I'm trying," when the officer is demanding that he unlock the door and open it. In that instance, though, if he appears to be not complying, how are officers to respond in that instance?
Yeah, I think that's a question that is going to be asked as part of this investigation. I don't know if there's a specific policy around that, but I'm sure there's going to be training around that, because this can't be the first time that's ever happened. So I think that's going to be a question that's going to be important to answer.
Arthur, what kind of thoughts come into play for officers? What are the factors that they're weighing when they have to react fairly quickly at if someone's not complying with their orders and they believe that person is a threat?
Well, they have to act in many cases instantaneously. And so training would also have to involve a lot of simulations of those circumstances. So there could be repeated practice for how to respond. Lowering of the voice is called for. Displaying a weapon in the manner that they did is going to ratchet up the tension in the situation, not only for the civilian, but also for the officers. The officers are becoming very tense by the very fact that they have a gun in their hand. People think that officers are always drawing their guns. That's not the case. Maybe tactical officers probably do it more often than patrol officers, but having the gun in hand is having an effect on the officer, not only the civilian.
And Sharon, we've got just a couple of seconds left, but we've only seen the video of the incident. But as you've mentioned, that doesn't show the entire picture. What else are investigators going to be looking at in just a few seconds?
Yeah, so they're going to be looking at all the ballistics evidence that's going to be analyzed. They're going to be looking at the autopsy results to, again, like you talked about earlier, the gun residue. They're going to try to figure out, did he actually fire his weapon? They're going to try to learn whether he did fire first, who fired first. And so there's a lot of important facts to be considered here. None of those things are dispositive, right? Even if he did fire first, that doesn't mean, that's the answer. And the officers were right in responding with deadly force, because the situation needs to be looked at in its entirety.
And it's going to take some time to do that. We'll all be waiting. My thanks to the two of you, Art Larigio and Sharon Fairley, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And that is our show for tonight. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.